While everyone's been paying attention to the bloodshed between Israel and Iran, Israel's also been using deadly force to control the crowds at food distribution sites in Gaza, according to the New York Times. Just this week, 59 Gazans got killed by tank shells and drone fire at one such checkpoint, according to witnesses who spoke to Reuters. In the 3 weeks since Israel took over control of the aid distribution in Gaza, these sorts of incidents have been happening all over, killing at least 397 Palestinians so far, according to data from Gaza's health ministry. Hello and welcome to NonZero World. I'm your host, Connor Eccles. In a few minutes, I'll be joined by NonZero Editor-in-Chief Wright to discuss all of the latest in the Israel-Iran war, including the possibility that the US could get sucked into the hostilities directly. But first, here are some of this week's most important headlines. If you want to study in America, you'd better be saying nice things about it. The State Department announced this week that it's going to start screening the social media of foreign students as well as visiting scholars for, quote, any indications of hostility toward the citizens, culture, government, institutions, or founding principles of the United States. You'll also have to make your social media account public in order to make it easier for officials to scrutinize. Jamil Jaffer of the Knight First Amendment Institute, a free speech group, says the policy is going to make, quote, a censor of every consular officer, and it will inevitably chill legitimate political speech, unquote. The U.S. Army Reserve got some very wealthy officers this week when tech executives from Meta, OpenAI, and Palantir got sworn in as lieutenant colonels. The Army says the new officers are going to work part-time and advise the military on how to do more stuff with drones and robots. Meanwhile, OpenAI got a $200 million contract from the Pentagon to develop prototype Frontier AI. The Pentagon says these new models will be for both warfighting and administrative purposes, while OpenAI says no, its work will not involve the, quote, development or use of weapons. In a Substack post, Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut railed against the argument popular in Washington today that the U.S. simply can't regulate AI lest we lose a tech arms race to China. In Murphy's view, unfettered development of AI would lead to massive job losses and social disruption that could undermine the very foundation of American society. Quote, artificial general intelligence could eliminate so many jobs and undermine so many of our values that China will cheer our decision to rush to AGI and our blind, feverish desire to be first, Murphy argued. Ultimately, he said, China could end up winning the race because we destroy ourselves along the race route. Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo reached a provisional deal to end the conflict in eastern Congo, which escalated in January when Rwanda-backed forces took the city of Goma. American officials who mediated the talks between the warring parties are hoping the deal will pave the way for massive Western investment in the region, which is chock full of the sorts of rare earth minerals that are badly needed for modern electronics. But regional analysts cautioned that similar peace deals have fallen apart in the past, including in recent years, and warned that big questions remain about how exactly this agreement would be implemented on the ground. After Israel's surprise attack on Iran, the G7 declared that Israel has a right to defend itself and slammed Iran as the principal source of instability and terror in the Middle East. A spokesman for Iran's foreign ministry condemned Western leaders for endorsing what he called Israel's blatant aggression against Iran, claiming that the preemptive war violates the United Nations Charter, a position endorsed by international law scholar Marko Milanovic, who argued in a blog post that Israel is, quote, using force against Iran unlawfully, end quote. For more on that and all of the other recent developments in the Iran-Israel war, let's go ahead to my conversation with NonZero Editor-in-Chief Wright. I hope you'll stick around. Hey, Bob, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Connor. How are you?
Pretty good. Medium good. It's kind of a chaotic week, though I guess you can still be good even if world events are sort of terrifying at all possible levels.
Oh, I think you should feel blissed out. We are in a give peace a chance segment of the Trump roller coaster. You got to enjoy these things while they last. I mean, a few hours he could have a change of heart, but right now he's saying, whereas only a couple of days ago the reports were that he was poised to bomb Fordo, the Iranian nuclear enrichment site that can be disabled from the air only by American arms.
Right.
And so apparently he was about to attack Iran. Uh, and now suddenly he's saying, "Well, let's spend a couple of weeks seeing if diplomacy will work." So we'll
We
see.
shall. Yeah, well, we're gonna dig into that, much more obviously in this conversation, but I could go ahead and we're already sort of introduced by this point, but I'll reintroduce us. Of course, you are Robert Wright, Bob to listeners of this podcast and to, most people that talk to you. And you are the editor in chief of NonZero. I am Connor Eccles, the managing editor of NonZero and the host of this, which is NonZero World, the weekend edition of the NonZero podcast. And I've said NonZero, I think, one too many times, and it
No, you can't
stops
say
sounding
enough.
like a
Can't say
word.
enough.
That's right. That's
It's
right.
it's it's the brand.
That's exactly
Did you
right. And
mention the
and
newsletter? You did mention the newsletter. Okay.
the newsletter's key, yeah. So nonzero.org for people that want to go see what we put in writing rather than this sort of now extended introduction to what will be a conversation, of course, about Iran and Israel. What one thing that we're going to do differently this time is that since Bob and I actually agree pretty much down the line on this one. I am going to play the other side. I am going to, as much as possible and without necessarily flagging it each time, try to communicate the Israeli point of view or sort of the pro bombing Iran in this situation point of view, and hopefully that will be helpful to make sure that we're not given just a one sided take on this because it's obviously big in the news and it's important to understand what people are saying from both sides. So that's our philosophy here. I guess to start off, boy, it's hard to see where we're going, but maybe we could start off just with a little bit of a recantation of what all has actually happened so far. So maybe I could do that for a second. And I guess it started. So it's sort of Thursday into Friday. The bombing begins. We start to see significant attacks coming both from Iran to Israel, Israel to Iran. Uh, Israel seems to have succeeded in knocking out significant nuclear facilities within Iran at the Natanz site, which is one of the major nuclear enrichment sites, as well as the Isfahan site, which has infrastructure within the supply chain of nuclear enrichment and nuclear fuel in general. Though the thing that has not been hit, and the big question looming over all of it, of course, is whether the US will join in order to hit Fordow, the sort of underground layer facility from the sort of negative point of view, where they've put it so deep that it seems that only the U.S. would be able to actually strike it. So I guess maybe a good place to start would just be, how are you feeling? Are you feeling more hopeful than you were a few days ago? Less hopeful about the situation?
Well, I think that depends partly on the question of what has motivated Trump's change of heart. I think this isn't just another Trump mood swing. And I'm curious as to what you think about this, but a role seems to have been played by the kind of activation of the anti-war part of the MAGA coalition, in particular, Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson.
Right.
There was a much watched and listened to conversation between them, and Tucker had reliable war advocate Ted Cruz on, and pretty successfully humiliated him, at least in the clip I saw that went viral, where Cruz had no
Right.
idea what the population of Iran was, but he was sure he wanted to attack it and change the regime. So do you think that what do you think is behind Trump's change of heart?
That is a good question. I think that Trump has a genuine fear of actual damage on the ground. I think he really doesn't like the idea of bombing people. I think he likes the idea of looking strong, and Israel looked really strong when it launched this attack, and they managed to knock out a lot of significant infrastructure. They killed They've now killed like dozens of high military commanders. They've really managed to do something that I think basically no one thought they could. It's this like elaborate multi-year preparation. It seems like they might have even had some materials pre-placed within Iran in order to launch, right? So
Oh,
I
yeah.
think at first Trump wanted to say, hey, this is great. I'm going to advertise the fact like American weapons were used in this. That shows that we're really strong. Israel is really putting Iran on the back foot. This is going to be great for me in negotiations. And then I think over the past week, he's just had to come to terms with the fact that, like, if you do get involved, it's going to mean, we've seen the way that Iran has struck cities in Israel. It's been really significant damage, and they've even knocked out or done significant damage to a refinery in Haifa in northwest Israel. And when you look at that and you think about all the American troops in the region, tens of thousands, it's going to make you hesitate a little bit. And I think that's where he is right now.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you're right, about how much damage Israel has done. There were, impressive, like, an impressive amount of prep work was done in terms of intelligence and the actual penetration of Iran with intelligence assets or some kind of assets. And that's why some people are saying, in principle, maybe they could take Fordo out from the ground. I'm skeptical. Their intelligence penetration would have to be, I think, even more impressive than we've seen. But um, as you said, Trump kind of seemed to warm up to the Israeli attack after not having obviously been enthusiastic about it in advance. In fact, supposedly we were in the middle of negotiations. We had scheduled another negotiation with Iran, and then what? Once Israel attacked, I'm still not clear on exactly what happened. It seemed like Trump then kind of pretended like he had been behind it all along because Trump
Right.
loves to be with a winner and and he didn't want to look as if he had as if Bibi was beyond his control, I guess. Although I think, Bibi was in effect. Uh, in any event, the attack certainly derailed any negotiations. In fact, I've heard mixed reports, but one was that Israel killed the lead negotiator. Uh, uh, I don't know what the status of that is. Um,
Yeah.
but as for do you know whether that turned out to be true or?
I've seen back and forth on it. I've seen
Yeah.
reports that he is in terrible condition in a hospital, and I've seen ones that he's dead. But
So
no,
they
I
hit
haven't
him. They
seen
did
anything
hit
solid.
him, right? Which is just
Yeah,
so brazen. It's just like BB saying to Trump, "Man, I own you." It's like
yeah,
this is this is the guy we were talking to. This was the leader of negotiations from the Iranian side.
right.
He's the guy America's choosing to talk to. And Bibi says, no, that conversation's over. We're killing him." And Trump
Yeah,
is like, yeah, yeah, I'm totally on board with this. So that's where we kind of are. As for Trump's fear of the consequences, I think he's right to be fearful. I think the forever war line is a little misleading. You're hearing a lot of that, Bannon and Tucker saying, but wait, you said no more forever wars. I don't think this would be a classic forever war. Won't be like Afghanistan. Won't be like Iraq. I'd be shocked if Trump were stupid enough to put troops on the ground.
mhm,
But it's a Pandora's box. I mean, Iran has so many ways to kill, Americans. There are all these soldiers in the Middle East. Iran has, proxies in Iraq, and that's one of 7 ways you can imagine them doing damage. I mean, they still have a formidable, ballistic missile capacity, and, so you just don't know, and it could be that they would, start, even trying to hit civilian targets, conceivably on American soil. I think that's a long shot, but if we attack Iran, Iran has to respond, I think, more forcefully than they did when Trump assassinated Soleimani the first
right.
time, who was the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guard commander. And now Israel has killed the current IRGC commander, of
Twice
course.
over. Yeah.
Yeah, where it's yeah, bad job to have. Um, but at that on in that case, Iran launched ballistic missiles, but it seems they gave indirectly America a heads up. They launched them at an American military base in Iraq,
Right.
and they totally blew apart these barracks. But apparently, they kind of made sure America had a heads up because they didn't really want to kill Americans. Americans were in the bomb shelter. They still got concussions, but
Yeah.
uh, I think if we attack Iran itself, I think Iran has to kill Americans, and they can. So where are we then? Trump will feel he can't back down. He'll have to retaliate. So if you play this out, although I don't think you wind up with a classic forever war, I think Trump winds up in a mess,
Yeah.
and and he probably, if he winds up supporting some regime change aspiration of Israel's, and certainly lots of people in America are advocating that, um, that's, that I don't know, these people must be slow learners. One thing about regime change is it pretty much never works out as you hope. There was a good piece in the Wall Street Journal about the IRGC. That is a much more powerful force than the regular Iranian military,
Right.
much more devoted to the regime, and as they pointed out, it, like, permeates Iranian life, including the economy, and, so, those are the guys with most of the guns, and I don't think, if they try to install, like, this, is he the son of the Shah of Iran? Who's this,
Oh,
he
Reza
reminds me of
Pahlavi.
he's the
Yeah.
equivalent of Chalabi in the Iraq War. Remember we had this guy lined up? He's gonna run Iraq, and he shows up, and, like, all the Iraqis are, like, visibly laughing at him, and, so, yeah, is this guy's the son of the
No,
Shah or the
yeah, I believe he's the son, and he
yeah,
has no
anyway.
real legitimacy in any case.
You probably wind up with either, more militant, if anything, leadership or as militant leadership, or you wind up with, a kind of chaos that winds up not being in our interest. I mean, remember, it was the chaos of the Iraq War that gave birth to ISIS. I I I presume everyone's
Right.
heard of ISIS? That became kind of a problem. You know, you would have to just be a nut to favor regime change. It's not impossible that it, in some sense, works out in ways that Israel and America wind up liking, but geez.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, maybe this is a good point for me to make sort of a strong pro what I think is, like, the best argument in favor of what's at least been going on so far, and then we can sorta dig into that because I think that's at the core of it, and, it starts I think that basically the best results that we can picture here from a military perspective is that Israel is able to continue the attacks and, in a lasting way, actually knock out some of these facilities, set back the program in a significant enough way that Iran is willing to come eventually, maybe to the negotiating table, but from an extraordinarily weakened position. And I think that when you look from Israel's perspective, and I think it is important, right? Iran is dedicated to, you know, it truly does hate the state of Israel, right? That is its primary enemy. That is much of its modus vivendi in foreign policy is countering Israel, and we see this time that they are in the single weakest position that they have been in years. None of their proxy like allies are able to act. None of their capacities have proven to be particularly effective. Even the responses that they've had here, we've seen notable kind of drops in the amount of missiles that they're willing to go with each day. And on top of it, they actually haven't even given up on diplomacy, even though everyone told us that if we bombed Iran, they would give up. And so the question is, I think the ideal thing from the sort of pro Israel perspective here would be that they find a way to disable Fordow without American participation. And I actually do think when you look in the press from just, in like Tablet Magazine or Free Press, places like that, that have a bit more of an emphatic pro Israel view, they've got some legitimate enough seeming experts that argue that you could probably take out this facility at Fordo by bombing the ventilation shafts that go in, and thus rendering it sort of uninhabitable or sort of impossible for humans to be in there for some time, or finding whatever power station there is miles away that is feeding electricity to this thing and knocking that out. And so either, or even a commando raid. So I guess that is like the strongest argument as far as I see it, is that we continue this way. The US stays out militarily, or stays where it is militarily. And then Israel continues to move forward. And eventually, once they feel as if they've destroyed enough things, then it's time to get back to the negotiating table, which Iran seems maybe willing to do.
What would the goal of negotiations be at that point? If you've incapacitated,
The goal of
what
the
would Israel be
negotiation,
demanding?
I mean, it'd be Israel as much as the US, but you'd be demanding a lasting end to all enrichment within Iran. That is Israel's, I think, top level goal. They can't accept that Iran has an enrichment capacity. They've said that repeatedly. I think that you would force Iran to buy uranium from abroad,
Uh, okay, this is after you're saying they could wipe out Fordo, so there would be no actual capacity,
which is a
but
question. Which
still
is a
you'd
question.
want them
Yeah.
to sign a paper saying they'd stay that way.
Basically, yeah. And that is one, that's the argument as far as I've been seeing it from sort of like the middle of the line pro-Israel take.
Um, yeah, I guess. There's a lot there. Um, uh, Let me say, well, first of all, if your goal is to keep Iran from having a nuclear weapon, there was a much easier way to do that without war. And I'll get back to that. It was on the table, trivially easy. Trump could have made a phone call. We're done. And I'll get back to that. But first, I'd like to emphasize that there are people who think that you should not, as a rule, we should not attack nations who pose no threat to us, and we should not encourage the attacking of nations by allies that are unprovoked. Okay, this was a for those who care about international law. This was a clear cut violation of international law by Israel, and the and by the way, Iran, not that it's Israel's or any other single nation's job to enforce the nuclear non-proliferation treaty anyway, but Iran is not in violation of the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. Okay, that prohibits the possession of nuclear weapons, and and some would say weapons grade uranium. Well, Iran doesn't have that. You can say it's in a gray zone with 60% enriched, but it does not have weapons grade uranium. It is not in clear violation of the NPT. It's not Israel's job to enforce that anyway. And by the way, as long as we're on the subject of international law and the NPT, I was kind of annoyed by so the foreign ministers of France, Germany, and the UK, along with the foreign minister of the or the high representative of the European Union, or whatever she, what's her
Ursula
name?
von der Leyen, yeah.
No, no, not her. The foreign minister of the EU, who
Kaja
was head.
Kallas.
Yeah, she was head of a Baltic nation. The So what they say about uh, international law is, quote, reaffirmed Israel's right to protect its security and people in adherence with international law. Well, look, I mean, it sounds like they're encouraging Israel to keep complying with it. If you're going to bring up international law in this context, at least say that Israel has egregiously violated it, okay?
Right.
And then they say they further warned against Iranian withdrawal from the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now, any nation that's in the NPT has the right to, I don't know if it's 6 months notice or something, to leave the NPT and develop a nuclear weapon. They would not be in violation of international law if they wait until after they're out of the NPT to develop a nuclear weapon. In fact, they would have the exact same status in international law as Israel, which never joined the NPT and developed nuclear weapons. Okay, so that's kind of the legal background. There's no justification for this attack whatsoever. There wasn't even an imminent threat. Nobody thinks Iran was even within months of having an actual nuclear weapon.
Well, Israel
Even if
does
they,
think that.
well, no, I mean,
Israel
you mean
argues that. I mean, that
on
they
what
that they
basis?
are that they're within that they have Israel claims to have intelligence that Iran was moving forward on weaponization research, right? So that's one side. And then also, I think it's worth noting. I mean, international law is difficult, and I think that the position that you've stated is clearly the majority position in international law. But some pro-Israel international legal scholars have made the argument that this should be understood as an escalation within an ongoing war, which
Look,
would thus be allowed.
an ongoing war that by almost any reckoning Israel started. Okay,
Sure. Yeah.
every exchange between Israel and Iran has started with Israel attacking Iran. Okay,
Right.
now, um, and as for the bomb, it would take weeks to go from 60% to 90%, close to a year to actually turn that into a nuclear weapon. That's everyone agrees on that, I think. I mean, yeah, I don't doubt. Look, they may have, in some sense, a nuclear weapons program. I mean,
Mm.
I think if you were Iran, you'd love to have a nuclear bomb. If you were Israel and had the only one in the region, you'd love to keep everyone else from having one. And the fact that Israel has one is the reason Iran would want to have one, not so they can wipe out Israel. I mean, anyone who's paid attention to Iran's actual conduct of its foreign policy doesn't think that that's what they would do with a nuclear weapon, but they do see it as a deterrent and just a source of power generally. Um, so where was I? Um, so anyway, okay, so that's as for international law, yeah, of course, there are whole think tanks that are funded in order to come up with bullshit arguments about international law. I mean,
Right.
any question about international law, you can find somebody who graduated from an impressive law school and they go on CNN and they say, well, you know, but you just, so the fact that someone's saying something about international law doesn't mean it makes any sense whatsoever. This is a clear-cut violation of international law by Israel, and if America attacked, it would be a clear-cut violation. And America and Israel are two of the leading violators of international law. And
Right.
Trump is an enthusiastic advocate of its violation. He just basically says, we will attack any country we want, like if they have minerals we want or whatever. Now, as for how easy it would have been to solve this problem, and you know, there's clearly a deal that Iran would have accepted. It would have been basically a return to the Obama deal where they are enriching at 3%, which is explicitly, enriching for civilian purposes is not only not disallowed by the NPT, explicitly allowed.
Right.
And you would have this unprecedentedly tight monitoring and inspection regime, on-site cameras and regular inspections that was in place, and that everyone, reasonable, everyone not like at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy or something, agreed was working. Okay.
Right.
We were confident of what Iran was doing with its nuclear program. We know Iran would have done that deal in a heartbeat. Now, it would have been awkward for Trump to sign on to that because he's the one who got out of that deal in the first place. He's the one who got us into this mess in his first term by abandoning a deal that was working. Now, so that's a political problem for Trump, who's not famous for saying, I was wrong, I apologize. But there's a way out, which is that, the most effective criticism of that deal, I thought, was that it was limited to 15 years, right? And, that was the best the American negotiators thought they could get at the time, whatever. That's what it was. Well, certainly now you could get Iran to agree to a much longer thing. You could say, look, let's make it 50, not 15 or whatever. If you made it 30, which again, you could do with a phone call, you could do that deal with a phone call right now. Um, Trump could say, I got twice the deal Obama got 30, not 15.
Right.
His would have expired in 2030. Mine expires in 2055. That would sound great. He's out. That's great. Politically, that works. But Uh, and during the negotiations, he was going back and forth on whether he would accept. He and Steve Witkoff were going back, sending conflicting signals on would they accept this very low level enrichment, or would they demand a complete end of enrichment. And at the end, they were demanding the complete end of enrichment, which most people thought from the beginning Iran's probably not going to accept. And I think that was to some extent under pressure from Israel and pro-Israel advocates, because Israel did not want a deal of any kind. That they would rather just bomb the thing and do regime change or whatever they want. So
Right.
Trump, by my reading, basically caved to Bibi and changed the terms of the deal, or changed the U.S. position in midstream, um, and Iran wasn't accepting it. Now, would they accept zero enrichment now? I don't know. At the moment, um, I will say that that puts Khomeini in a tough position, right? Because it's like, well, then, if you're going to take the deal that was on the table before Israel bombed the shit out of us, why did you put us through this, right? So
Right.
that's hard for him to do. Um, and in any event, Iran is currently demanding that Israel stop bombing before they'll talk at all. So we'll see what happens. But this was not a hard problem, you know.
Yeah.
It was trivially easy. Uh, but Trump is president. Not that Biden was any better on this issue, actually, but we are
Yeah.
where we are.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're pointing to, this is me kind of pulling back a little bit from the pure, I don't know, maybe American pro-Israel perspective, but I think it points to a fundamental aspect of the US-Israel relationship that's been a challenge forever, which is that our national interests don't align perfectly, right? Like there are actually significant differences, and everything that you've said, I think, would be totally unpersuasive to an Israeli, right? Because for an Israeli, the idea that Iran is going to enrich its uranium to 60% for leverage in the talks. What's the difference between that and moving towards a weapon? There isn't one, right? Fundamentally, for them, that is bringing Iran closer to a nuclear weapon. Whereas for the US, it's like, I think that we're able to see that in its broader context because we are not really directly in the crosshairs here. We're not involved in this situation, and it's not a state that's dedicated to actually dealing, Iran does actually want to do damage to Israel. They would like to. Whereas for the US, yeah,
Well,
this is just
I'd
not clearly
like
in our
to.
interests.
I'd like to talk about that. That is.
Sure.
I'd like to set that aside and talk about Iran's strategic aspirations. But the wait, what were you?
Well, I was
Yeah.
just
Well,
saying that it's
as
like a
for
split
look,
in interests.
okay,
Yeah.
but okay, but here's my question. Okay, no, Israel doesn't like 60%. It's weeks away from 90%. That's months away from a bomb. I understand why that makes them less comfortable than they were a year ago. But
Right.
here's my question. What, from their point of view, was the problem with a regime where we were sure Iran was not enriching to anywhere near the level you would need to then embark on that year-long project of building a bomb? We could have gotten that. And why does Israel prefer the current world where, they're now, they're getting hit non-trivially and by Iran, and leaving aside all the civilians they've killed in Iran, and there are civilians being killed on both sides.
Right.
All kinds of. Why doesn't? What's wrong with the situation we had? If you imagine it being extended to 30, 50 years, eternity, whatever, what's wrong with that deal
Well,
from Israel's point of view?
I think that you see within Israel a strong view that basically all of its neighbors are committed to its destruction. And I think that is a sincerely held one. I
Hmm.
don't think that it's coming from nowhere. And I also think when you look at, for example, the polling differences on this versus the Gaza war right now, like the Gaza war within Israel, unpopular. It's an actual problem for Bibi. This war with Iran, very, very popular. Even though there's been actual attacks on Israeli cities, there have been civilian casualties. There was a strike that hit a hospital and that injured people within the hospital. I think even killed some people, and that's like terrifying to live under. But I really do think that Israelis, on average, don't think that there is a deal that is stringent enough that it would take away the risk enough that they're willing to live with it, right? And they see what happens. I mean, they've pressed their military advantage over and over again for the last year, and it just keeps, it keeps working. Assad's
Mhm.
gone. Hezbollah's gone. Hamas is very weak. Iran is very weak. I think that it would take a lot to convince them that a deal is the best option they have on the table right now.
Um, I think it is widely held that, in Israel, they're surrounded by enemies, and in some sense, they are. I mean, technically, Egypt and Jordan, are not enemies,
Certainly
but
not, yeah.
there's a lot of people who hate them. I would go further and say that they think that the level of hatred is almost like a universal constant. It's gonna be there forever.
Right.
And so what they have to do is just, incapacitate everyone. I mean, that explains the Syria, episode recently where the regime they'd been trying to dislodge finally fell. You had this new regime in Syria, which, not everybody's dream regime, but every serious observer said, well, they're definitely not going to be a threat to Israel, given the way
Yeah.
this works out, the connection to Turkey, blah, blah, blah. Not a problem for Israel. What does Israel do? They immediately attack and wipe out any remaining military assets that the Assad regime, again, egregious violation of international law. Nobody in all of America complains about it, so far as I can tell,
Yeah.
even though they're using American weapons that we're paying for and that associate us with the attack, just as we're associated with this and with Gaza because we're paying for it, they're using our weapons. Um, so you might ask, like, why would they do? Why antagonize a new regime that nobody thinks is has hostile intent now? And I think you're right. The answer is Israel thinks everybody's always going to hate it, no matter what. I disagree. I think hatred is a variable, and in fact, if you look at world opinion, you can see it definitely hatred of Israel, dislike of Israel can go up. Look at the
Yeah.
opinion polls now compared to 2 years ago. Israel has increased the amount of hatred of Israel. I think they've increased, the at least expressions of anti-Semitism, some of them violent. Obviously, it doesn't make logical sense for what Israel does to increase anti-Semitism. Doesn't make sense to hold Jews accountable for what Bibi does. Doesn't even make sense to hold all Israelis accountable. But it's a predictable consequence.
Right.
So I just think I agree that there is this view in Israel. I would further say it is profoundly in Bibi Netanyahu's political interest to amplify the fear, just as most politicians, so many national leaders amplify fear. Trump amplifies fear all the time. Biden amplified fear. It's like what national leaders do. Um, so I don't deny that Israel doesn't view the attack on Iran as gratuitous. I agree.
Yeah.
But I still, I got to say, it still seems a little weird to me that uh, if they could have had assurance that Iran was not developing a nuclear weapon, without doing this and without the counterattacks and everything, I still don't totally get why that has so little support apparently in Israel. No
Yeah.
matter how dark your view of, and eventually I do want to get to the question of, well, does Iran really want to wipe out Israel? In what sense? And so on. But um, that's my take.
Yeah, I mean, that is the hard part, and it's a problem that, from the perspective of people that would very much like Israel to stop doing this, which I think both of us obviously feel that way, would like to stop with all these military adventures. I don't think it's very clear how you convince Israelis that this is wrong-headed, right? There's just not an obvious, because you can lay out the sort of rational case that I think you've made, but there just is a feeling that I think is difficult to, and just like doctrinal things within the military and the way that they've approached things in the past, where they feel as if their biggest advantage is military force. Their biggest disadvantage is diplomacy because no one wants to talk to them, right? So maybe they could ride on the back of U.S. diplomacy, and that could help. But I mean, it
Well, wait, no one wants to target. I mean, yeah, I mean, the diplomacy as a practical matter isn't a problem. I mean, they don't want to do it. You
certainly
know,
they don't want to do it.
they
Yeah,
literally kill again, they tried to kill the guy who was who was leading the Iranian delegation. Israel, they didn't want the diplomacy in this case.
right. No, well, they certainly didn't. They certainly didn't. Well, why don't we go to the question of if Iran is really committed to the destruction of Israel? I think that might be an interesting place
Yeah.
because that I think is at the center of this.
Yeah, but I wanna add that you said, "Well, we can't persuade, Israelis to change their worldview." Well, no, but, uh we could change their behavior because we have an incredible amount of leverage, and, we could say, "You can't use our weapons." You could say I mean, Trump could have said, "We are in the process of" now, I don't mean politically he could have said it. Let's set
Right.
aside the domestic politics. But if you're asking what leverage do we have about Israel, game in terms of game theory, all you gotta do is say, "We are in the process of negotiation with Iran. If you attack them, we will not help you defend yourselves against their missiles." I mean, of course, some of our weapon systems are just in their hands, but, like our ships are active, I think, in
Right.
shooting down missiles and things. And you can say, and we will cut off the flow. If we have plenty of leverage to alter Israel's behavior. What people mean, when they say, "Well, we couldn't, we couldn't, we have no control," is they mean that Trump fears the domestic political fallout too much, and that's one reason it's interesting. This Tucker Bannon
Right.
thing is kind of an interesting development. But let me just this the assumption that we can't use leverage with Israel, that we use it with other countries, but not Israel, is embedded so subtly in the coverage. I just want to There's a New York Times piece outlining uh, our options. At one end of the spectrum was sitting back and doing nothing and then deciding on next steps once it became clear how much Iran had been weakened by the attack. At the other end was joining Israel in the military assault, possibly to the point of forcing regime change in Israel. So the whole end of the spectrum, we actually try to influence Israel's behavior by using our leverage is just not there, and
Right.
they don't. This is just standard New York Times reporting, and they don't go on to say, there are levers, but Trump couldn't use them because he fears, like all other presidents, the political fallout. They just act like they're not there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it relates to the idea too that I think is pernicious in American foreign policy in general, even though it sounds very good, which is that like everyone who is our ally in any sense of the word, we must kind of go out of our way to defend them. I think that we approach it different, like the Republicans and Democrats approach that differently, right? So the Republicans tend to focus more on Israel these days, right? And I mean, Biden wasn't so different, but they're a little bit more locked in there. And the Democrats tend to talk about that with relation to Europe in ways that mangled our approach to the Ukraine war, I think, because we were relying so much on the views of our European allies, be they, Eastern European small states that are particularly afraid of Russia, Poland, whatever. And it mangles your view when you're not able to kind of separate your own national interests from the national interests of your allies, which will and must diverge at times. And so there just needs to be more of like a flexibility around these things. I think fundamentally, there needs to be like a realism, like a foreign policy, international relations realism, where we're able to understand, hey, uh, there is value to allies, but they will not hesitate to act in their interests when it is in their interests, and we shouldn't either.
Yeah, although I don't think Europe and Israel are strictly comparable. I mean, there's just more political weight behind Israel in American politics, than there is any given
Right.
Ukraine, for example. There is a Ukraine lobby, but it's just not all that. all that strong. It's not nothing. And in fact, the original decision to expand NATO, which I think was disastrous by Clinton, was influenced heavily by consideration, not for Ukrainian votes per se, but for Eastern European voters of Eastern European heritage in the Midwest. Played a
Right.
big role. That and the arms industry. So there are all kinds of lobbies, but Israel is special. It's the third rail of American
It is.
politics, famously, and the again, that's why this. I mean, it's true that if you look at the polls now, Republicans are significantly more supportive of Israel. Uh, but you do now, both parties have, an energetic dissent.
Yeah.
On the one hand, Bannon and so on, and the other hand, kind of the far-ish left, like Bernie, in the Democratic Party. And the other interesting development.
This was a free preview of NonZero World. To unlock the rest of this conversation and other exclusive content, become an NZN member today at nonzero.org.